The Senate Parliamentarian heard arguments from Democrats to include immigration provisions in the upcoming budget reconciliation package. The provisions would provide a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children, undocumented farm workers, temporary protected status holders, and essential workers.
According to roll call, Democrats' ability to pass this legislation hinges on whether Parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough will allow it. Earlier this year, she rejected their attempt to push through a minimum wage increase through budget reconciliation. Now, it's extraordinarily important to remember that she is a staffer, who works at the pleasure of the elected senators. She issues an advisory opinion as to whether or not something can go through these complex rules of budget reconciliation. Rachel, you know reconciliation quite well. My understanding is that there is some precedent for immigration to be included. It has been included in the past. Certainly nothing as extensive as 10 plus million people getting a pathway to citizenship. In order for it to clear, it has to have budget impact, and that has to be the goal of the policy. It's fascinating that Democrats are arguing that the goal of their reconciliation package on the immigration front is to turn undocumented people into citizens who then are eligible for all of the same federal benefits that all other citizens are able to access. That seems to not only satisfy reconciliation, but it's an extraordinary political break from where our immigration politics has been for a generation or 100 years, really.
Yeah, that's the really sort of big thing about it to me. I mean, there's a couple things to talk about here, but the first is that, when this was discussed initially among Democrats, it was like, we're going to do this for DACA. We're going to focus on DACA recipients. If we get it at all, it's just going to be for them. And that's sort of, when you've seen the limited immigration debate that we've had, in the last couple of years, it's always been about that. This is a massive expansion of that. I mean, we are talking about anyone here under temporary protected status, which is a lot of people, undocumented farm workers, in addition to just outside of the DACA program, anyone brought here as children. So that's a massive, massive shift, to your point. And this is where I think it actually may get caught up in the reconciliation rules, because if anyone's familiar with this process, not to bore anyone, but, around reconciliation, there's only sort of, you're hemmed in by rules that say, this has to be basically explicitly budgetary. And people get caught up in that merely incidental test, right? If they can only show a limited link to this is actual budget policy, sometimes they can't get past the Byrd rule. The second issue I think we're going to potentially have here is what you said, that all these people are now going to be given federal benefits. So under the constraints of the Byrd rule, you cannot show a budgetary effect beyond a 10-year window. It's how we score budgets, on 5 and 10-year windows. I don't know how they're going to make that case. If they're going to be able to say, people going on lifetime benefits is just going to be within the 10-year window. If you remember from the Bush tax cuts years ago, this is why when they sunset the estate tax, it came back after 10 years. Right. That's how they got around that year. So, Kim, I don't know if you have thoughts on whether or not this is sort of we've sort of talked about it from a strategic, procedural angle, but, from a political angle, is this too big of a bite Democrats are taking, or sort of right in line where they need to be?
It's probably a little bit too big of a bite, I would say, for it to actually go through and for people to really, truly support it. I mean, obviously, many of us do feel like if a person, not only DACA, but others who are paying into the system, if they're working in this country and they've built a life in this country and they're paying into the system, they should reap those rewards back. I mean, they should get some of that money back to them. Otherwise, it's slavery, quite frankly, right? We get them to pay in and we tax them and then we take their money and run. So I do think there could be an argument to be made for the expansion if they can actually lay it out like that. But otherwise, I think what most of us are really concerned about is DACA. And we've been concerned about DACA. And when they expand it like this, it just whittles away the chances that DACA recipients are actually going to get what they need, which is citizenship in this country. They are Americans. They don't know anything different than this country, and they should be given that citizen. We give citizenship to people who are born in this country and then they take off and they're building someone else's country, but we don't give citizenship to people who are here building our country, building our communities, and that's to me a crime. So this is always kind of what I feel like Democrats, and I'm sure people on the right do this as well, which is kind of expand it to the point of no return, to where it's like, okay, well now it's just going to go out the wayside, and there goes that.
I mean, if it can get through reconciliation, I think Democrats are going to do it. And I would say go for it. Why leave 9 million people behind if you have this chance to go ahead and do it? And if the parliamentarian issues an opinion against it, I'd say fire her. It's not up to her. We have elections. People vote. Those politicians go to Washington. They pass laws. Then voters vote on whether or not they like the laws that they passed. It should not be up to some staffer to decide whether or not we're going to make these, huge social decisions.
Well, at the end of the day, procedurally it's not, right? The Senate always gets to decide. If she advises, the Senate does not have to take her opinion.
That's true.
And they can,
whoever's in the chair.
Correct.
It doesn't have to be Kamala Harris.
They can overturn her appeal, right? This is how they invoke the nuclear option, multiple times at this point. Although I will say there's precedent for firing a parliamentarian.
Right.
Bob
Republicans
Dove
did it,
got
right?
tossed, I think a decade or so ago. But what's interesting to me about this issue and the DACA issue that Kim talked about too is that it's been a really long time, and you and I have talked about this in other contexts, that we haven't had a really good substantive immigration debate since really 2007. And I think that's a lot of sort of leadership protecting members from taking tough votes. But I do wonder on this issue, because reconciliation gets through the Senate with 51 votes. That's why it's like the thing everybody wants to use. But I do wonder on a test vote, what the whip count is on this. Yes, potentially you get every Democrat. How many Republicans do you get? Because I'm always in favor of, when you're able to pass things not on a party line, they stick around a lot longer. They tend to, people tend to be a lot more comfortable with that process. So I do wonder on DACA by itself what the whip count is, because again, we haven't seen a vote on it in a very long time.
I would guess DACA is way more popular. I would guess that there are a lot of Republicans who actually say, okay, I can agree that these folks do need citizenship in this country. They've been here forever. But it is that expansion that then would suddenly cause it to become hyper-partisan.
John Cornyn has said he's for it, right? John Cornyn had, I think, said for a long time, hold DACA back in order to use it. And Democrats have said the same thing. Hold it back so that we can use it as the bargaining chip to get the rest of comprehensive immigration reform through. And finally, Cornyn, like a lot of other Democrats, have now just said, you know what? It's not going to happen. The comprehensive bill's not going to happen. So stop holding them hostage. Let's just vote on that.
Well, a lot of Republicans want border security is what they want. Right. And they want, both things. So.
Right, and Democrats are like, screw it. Like, you're not going to vote with us. We spent all this money on border security. We spent all this time negotiating back in 2007, again in 2013. Didn't happen. So I think Democrats and Republicans are both at a place where they're acknowledging that there's not going to be a comprehensive deal. And so if you can do it with 50 votes, you just do it.
And round we go.
And round we go. Yeah.
Well, tomorrow on Rising, we have a great show for you. Friend of the show and host of the Bad Faith podcast, Brianna Joy Gray, will be here.
Plus, former Trump spokesman Jason Miller joins us to give us the lowdown on why he was briefly detained in Brazil last week.
See you tomorrow.
All right, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.